Equity and inclusion, buzzwords of this year. It's been around for a while, but how real is it? Is it politically correctness, or are we having diversity and equity in the workplace? That's what we'll talk about tonight. Welcome to Workplace Shift. I'm Nicolette, DeVidar. Joining me today is Cheryl Orr. She's owner of InsightHR Partners. Cheryl is joining us from Dallas, Texas, with lots of insights on the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I'm Cheryl on Workplace Shift. It's so great for you to join us. And I do want to say for our viewers, particularly since Cheryl is joining us from Dallas in Texas on this very cold day, probably one of the worst winter storms in recent history, actually in quite a while in recent history. So thanks so much for joining us, Cheryl.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Nicolette.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge topic. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I want to go a little bit, I want to start out a little bit with the history of this. Since you come from the affirmative action side, how did this all evolve? Can you give us sort of a brief overview?
Absolutely. You know, I am way back when I first started my workplace, I had a wonderful boss who said to me, you know, we need an affirmative action plan. I had no idea what that was. And so I said, okay, well, whatever, just tell me how to do it. So he began to, he sent me to the feds, he sent me all over, and he said, this is what you need to do. You need to prepare affirmative action plan for, at the time, it was a school district, and it will have to be submitted to the feds. It has to be in great shape. And so I did that. In the process of doing that, I think I became committed to this whole process that our workforce ought to be diverse, that our workforce not only, and at the time it really wasn't, I wasn't even thinking about once people got there. What I was thinking about is how do we go out and get people who are diverse to create this diverse workplace. And that's exactly what Affirmative Action Plan did. Yeah. And so we went on. Because I was so young and it was so early in my career, every time I got another job, they would see that I had done that. And they would ask me, well, we want you to take over. I don't know if they asked me or told me, we want you to, as part of human resources, to take over the EEO function, which it evolved to. And so now you have equal employment opportunity, which really is more about enforcement. You have these laws, you have EEOC, they say you have to do it this way. And now you have laws that have to be enforced. So that's how I moved, with a commitment that if these are the laws of the land, if you will, then people really need to obey them, if you will. Now, my focus has always been and always will be the workplace. What happens in the workplace? I can't help what happens across the land. What I can focus on is how this impacts the workplace.
So let's talk about the workplace. Now that you say we have the lay of the land, there are laws in place. Do we really have diversity and inclusion in the workplace? Is it politically correctness motivated, or is it actually happening? What do you see?
Oh no, it's happening across this country over the last 10 years. So let me just be clear. From the EEO perspective and the compliance perspective and then the investigative, there also was this desire to prevent things from happening, to prevent discrimination, to prevent sexual harassment. So the EEO function took much of that prevention piece. As time went on, and I don't really even know when, all of a sudden I heard about diversity. Well, I know what that is. That's making sure that your workplace has different people. And I believe that the workplace really did try, and is still trying, by the way, to make sure that they have diverse pools of candidates, that they consider diversity when they're hiring. And I believe firmly that that's going on across this country in our workplaces. Now, remember, my narrow workplace is the public sector. I've had some forays out of it, but it's public sector. But it doesn't matter whether it's public or private. I believe that the workplace has assumed the value that it is important to have a diverse workplace.
I want to pick up on something that you said, and I think it's really important because I believe that most people still think about diversity when they hear about diversity in the workplace, mainly about race. But what you just said is you have different people. So there is a lot more to diversity than just the aspect of color.
Yes, of race.
So you have the background, you have age groups, different demographics, etc. Correct?
Absolutely. Race is important because of all that we've seen, but it is not only about diversity. Mm-hmm. Diversity is all of the differences, and they have wonderful definitions that talk about all the differences that you bring. There was race, maybe, there was disability, which is big now, making sure folks who were disabled could come into the workplace and work. There is LGBTQ folks, and could come in and work to their capacity. Yep. So no matter, there were Muslims, there were Jews, there were everybody. Mm-hmm. It is about the diversity of the workplace. But I still want to say that it's important that we maintain our vigilance around making sure that it is ethnically, mm-hmm. and racially balanced, sometimes gender balanced, depending mm-hmm. on where the workplace is, which one you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Fire services have consistently tried to make sure that their workplace have women in it. Mm-hmm. So it is the diversity across the spectrum that we talk about.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because we did have a workplace shift program on inclusive employment where we talked about disability. And there was still, I mean, when you look at the landscape, there's still room for improvement, let me put it this way. And if, for our audience, if you're listening to this or if you're watching this, you can certainly go back and look at the other program because there were some statistics and facts in how inclusive employment actually improves the bottom line of the organization. So when we look about diversity, the statistics are pretty straightforward. They all say that once you have more diversity, you also perform better. But why has that been so hard, Cheryl, for organizations to implement that? Or is that just because people have a different view on what diversity is, or isn't?
No. Yeah, the isms are still there. Mm-hmm. They're there. The racisms, the sexisms, the homophobism, all of them are still there. Mm-hmm. And so that is why we now have to move to inclusion. What does inclusion mean? It doesn't mean that I go out and bring this wonderfully diverse group of people and they're all sitting at the table, but I don't listen to any of them. Mm-hmm. I don't value any of them. I don't respect any of them. That's what this is about. So we still have to combat stereotypes and discrimination and implicit bias and explicit bias. Those things still exist. Mm-hmm. And that's what the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion programming addresses, particularly the inclusion piece. Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk a little bit more about words, because I think the definitions are all over the place. So how does equity fit into all of this?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I actually, when we moved from EEO, it was diversity and inclusion. And honestly, and I read about DE&I all the time. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, there was an E there. And I said, now, where did that E come from in this field? And as I looked at it, it was about equity. It started with equality, which comes from the outside, but from a workplace perspective, it's about treating people equitably in the workplace. And that had to be part of what folks needed to be thinking about, talking about. And the reason I say that is, how do you do that? Now, it's hard to treat everybody the same. That's not what I said. Mm-hmm. But it is important that people are treated equitably in the workplace. And so that's where that whole, again, it came from the social justice movement external to the workplace, but the workplace has embraced it as one of the factors that needs to be part of the diversity and inclusion program. Mm-hmm. So that's my thinking. Mm-hmm. That's how I read it. And that's where I think it came from. And I'm delighted. I think the evolution of the whole diversity programming it's been fabulous. It really has. From a workplace, let's make sure people are included. Let's make sure. And you know what, Nicolette, the bottom line is, I just want the person to come to the workplace and do the best work they can do in an environment that is conducive to them doing that best work. That's what this is all about. So there's a whole lot of pieces that go to that.
Yes.
But that's it. We want them to do their job, customer service, HR, where our customers are you all, the workplace. Do the best you can do because you feel like you belong there. You feel like you're part of that workplace.
And I think it's also important that people feel that they can go to the workplace, they can contribute with their whole self and with all of their ideas. But herein is the challenge though, because that would mean that we all need to do a heck of a lot of personal development to be able to accept one another, to come from probably a radically different viewpoint, probably a very different background, because everybody, the way where you worked, how you've grown up, how you were brought up, what you've experienced, it all kind of shapes how you perceive and see things, right? So we all see these things through our own lens. And so at times, I do see people struggle with the fact when someone comes, it's more expected from people to adjust to the prevalent culture that's there versus actually accepting people on the level and where they are and with the culture and with the background where they come from, to accept that culture and embrace that as a new piece or as a new input into an organization. How do we navigate that?
It starts with leadership. It starts with your value, your vision, and your guiding principles, if you will. They're pretty much the same value. But it starts at that level. It says, this is the kind of organization we're going to be. As a result of that, this is what we have to do. And I have always been a proponent of good values. When I say good values, values that the organization says, these are important to me. Almost inevitably integrity and respect and all kinds of words that indicate how you interact with someone. And if you really live those values, then you have to learn how to interact with different people. And that's what the whole diversity and equity and inclusion program, if you will, is about. It's about all these factors that help the workplace value each other. You said something earlier that I always want to sneak this word in. The young people call it coming to work with my authentic self. I love that word. I love that word.
Yes.
And that is, we used to say in HR, when you got to the door of your workplace, you put your hat on, you put your face on, and you come to work with your work face on.
Yep.
We're not doing that anymore. Thank goodness.
Yes.
We're saying, there's some standards, some assimilation that has to happen, right? Just for order. But that I can come here with my blue hair, I can come here, with my big earrings, and I can come here and contribute with all of that. And that's not important. What's important is what I come here to contribute to this organization.
Of course, there's a second part to it, which also means that whoever comes to the organization, the individual has a responsibility too to do their homework, to really figure out who they truly are authentically. Because I found the more authentic and in tune someone is with themselves, the more open they can be of accepting someone else and where they're coming from, because they don't feel threatened or intimidated or kind of like, being like on the defense all the time. So I think to me, this is a really good message that could go both ways. So you can find out where you are and be authentically you, and also have the workplace that says, yes, we want that authentic you, which is a really important point. So it goes both ways.
It does. They're very nice. I was like, very nicely said. I totally agree with that. You have to do some work on yourself.
Exactly.
And I'll have to tell you, the boomers and the Xers are probably the ones, it's the fact, that have to do the most work, because we come to the workplace with certain values, with certain things in our head, and often biases, unfortunately. And so we have to do work, and I've had to do work. And your millenniums come, everybody's got some bias around something, some stereotype, but they come with less of them.
Yes.
They come with less of them. And so
Yeah.
we're just, this big old workplace, we're just trying to help melt it so that they can value and respect and get those folks in there and make sure, they say millenniums don't stay. Well, I don't care about you staying. What I want is the best you have to give me while
you're there.
That's what I want.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned something earlier where you said everybody gets treated equitably. Let's talk very briefly about, give us an example of that. What is that? What could we expect?
Well, in the promotion process.
Okay.
The promotion process. So it has in the government, it's a little different in private sector, so I can only talk about government. Mm-hmm. In government, it has a defined process. Mm-hmm. You have to meet the minimum qualifications for the job. You have to go through an application process. You have to interview. They check your references, and then the group sitting around the table has this pool of wonderful candidates and has to make a decision about the best candidate. Mm-hmm. The best candidate is not the one that looks like me always. Sometimes, but not always. The best candidate is not the one that has every degree possible, but has not done anything else in their career. Mm-hmm. So what you're looking for is the candidate that best belongs in your organization, not fits anymore, but belongs there.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
And let me just say this really quick. So the equitable promotional practices are under enormous pressure because people have complained vociferously that particular practice in HR and in government has not been an equitable practice. That's a good example. No.
And that actually leads to the very last question, and it's got to be quick. Where do you see the biggest potential for diversity, equity, and inclusion? I mean, we talked already about the promotion, but are there any other improvements?
Well, I think we have to let me say, this is about a culture change. Mm-hmm. And a culture change does not happen overnight. Mm-hmm. And the leadership has to embrace that culture change, indicate that's what's going to happen here, and then give all the resources to make sure that culture change becomes institutional. Then we're there. We got a ways to go, but people really are doing the things they need to do to make sure that their workplaces are equitable, are inclusive, and clearly that diversity is valued in their workplace.
What a great ending. Thank you so much for joining us, Cheryl. Yes, the time is already done. It was half an hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
Really? Wow. It's great.
Hang on a second. No, hang on a second. I'm just hearing something here. We may actually do a few more questions.
Okay. No hard ones, please.
I'm trying to hold up my hands every 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm 17? Oh no, keep going. Do not hang up. We have more questions. Good. I thought like we were already out, but we're editing it. So no, I have more questions for you. Do not go away.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about equity and inclusion and diversity. Let's talk about what role plays HR in all of this, in bringing it together and moving it on the right track going forward.
Well, let me just say this. There's somewhat of a bifurcation between HR and the DE&I role. And the reason I say that is I have always been in HR as a DE&I person, advocate. Mm-hmm. What I have found, though, is that there's been a desire to pull that piece out of HR and have it be standalone. And often so that it can report directly to the leadership of the organization. Mm-hmm. I don't think I have any problem with that. I do think that they have to work closely together because both of them impact in the organization. Now, some DE&I directors or officers have an external function, to the customers, to the citizens. Mm-hmm. And so HR doesn't have that. So we do have to work closely with the DE&I folks if they're not reporting through HR, to make sure that this workplace I call it nirvana kind of workplace that we're trying to create, is happening. And we know it takes some time to do that. So that's really, I've seen it pulled out. I've seen them be separate. They're reporting often to the highest levels, which is absolutely right. And they have to collaborate, cooperate with HR.
Yeah, because I would see this, I think you're right. I would see this actually, I do see this a little bit problematic to have it separate because it's so it really is intertwined if you think about this, particularly if you look at the modern organization going forward, where HR is really finding its place in the organization as well. Then if you look at it from an overall holistic organizational point of view, it's hard to have one separate from the other.
It's happening. And we just have to figure out how to work together.
Yeah.
I've seen so many of the DE&I officers now who are being hired by city managers, who are being reporting to deputies. So it's happening. But what I would want to say is that we have to work together. We're all about the culture. We're all about the people, how best to create this culture that supports people's growth and development. And DE&I is one of those things. I just happen to be kind of a different breed because I kind of came up through the DE&I realm, but I never left HR. So, I have this mesh together of that. And I imagine, by the way, a lot of these DE&I directors and coordinators and whatever titles are coming out of HR. They have a passion for diversity. They have worked that passion through training. And when those jobs are coming up, those are the folks that are going. I take delight in the fact that they have HR backgrounds.
Yeah, it definitely would make sense. Do you think having a more a broader approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that comes more natural to the public management function because you're involving all those different stakeholders from the beginning versus the private sector?
I don't know about that, Nicolette. Let me just tell you, I think that the public sector, because of its, and I hate to say this, but I'm going to, because of its rigidity, has been a little more difficult to break the sort of thinking around DE&I.
Really?
What is the thinking into? Versus private, they picked it up faster. They hired VPs and executive vice presidents much faster than government has. And to my chagrin, frankly. But I think having, again, I read about DE&I all the time. I think that governments, I'll call it local governments, state governments, federal government, are really beginning to embrace, mainly because of all these young people who are saying, if I'm not valued, I'm not staying. I don't care if it took me a year to get in here. And so it's a retention issue. It is there's a whole lot of issues involved in why government now must embrace, and by the way, has, because I'm seeing it all over the place. I really am. And I'm very excited. I was actually hired by the city of Dallas when I came to Texas to be their ethics and diversity officer. As you notice, I actually left HR to do that because I reported directly to the city manager. But what he was saying is, I want folks to focus on this DE&I realm. And I totally appreciated that. So in order to do pure DE&I had to step out of HR to do that.
That's very, very interesting.
Not without the wonderful support of the HR director at the time. And I mean this, without her, I could not have done the things that I did in establishing the DE&I program.
Let's talk a little bit more about some difficult conversations. So we know we have the landscape in place, there are laws in place, there are processes in place to make sure that diversity is happening, that inclusion is happening. But what are some of the difficult conversations that must happen in workplaces to address this issue on a deeper level and not hide behind what's allowed and what's not allowed? In other words, to kind of shy away from actually doing it and just erring on the legal side versus really embracing it and talking about some of those difficult issues.
Yeah, that you know, it's that this whole piece about courageous conversations, difficult conversations. When I talk about D&I, this is not about a perfection. This is about a process for people being able to work together and getting work done, if you will. So that process says, you know, I say I'm not a racist, you say you're not a racist, but then you turn around and make, the word now is microaggression. You say something that hits me as tinging upon racist. And therefore, I now have some difficulty interacting with you. I need to be able to say that to you, that what you just said to me is difficult. And you need to be able to hear from me that that was something that I found inappropriate or racist or however you want to put it. And then we now have to dialogue. And that's where this whole courageous conversation, which I adore, which I think is great, is coming from. That's what it's about. And teaching people how to do that is incredible. And the other thing is, I always say in all my presentations, you have to teach people how to manage conflict. It's a process. It isn't, you know, this happens and we're all done. It's a process. So we have to teach people how to be inclusive, and when they have not been inclusive, how to hear that and then how to make the changes. So that's what I find is really important.
Yep.
Sorry.
So teaching and, of course, also listening, those are the two parts that we need to look out for. We are at the end of the show. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for joining us from very cold Dallas, Texas. I hope it gets warmer for you so you don't have to freeze and actually enjoy a little bit more of the warmer weather. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, Nicolette. I really appreciate being able to talk about something I'm so passionate about.